Welcome to Inside New York's Art World. I'm Barbara Lee Diamonstein, and our guest today is considered by many to be the most influential graphics designer in the country. He is also widely admired as a painter, illustrator, and enhancer of the visual environment. It's a real pleasure to have you join us, Ivan Chermayeff. You also deserve praise as an environmental pioneer. Long before many of us thought of either the streetscape, the cityscape, or urban connective tissue, you did. Perhaps you might begin by telling us how it all began for you. What in your early environment influenced you?
Well, first of all, I have to back up and think for a long time as to what an environmental pioneer is, because I'm sure it doesn't really fit. But it'd be interesting to know to what extent it does, at least. I've come from a family of artistic types. At least my father is an architect and designer, painter, and my brother's an architect too, and a partner. So and we were very close in age, still are, and so I was brought up in a very mixed environment, which was neither one particular profession or another. It was always a mix of activities, and there were a lot of painters who were friends of my parents, and a lot of architects, of course, and
some philosophers too,
and writers, and generally people from many parts of the world, as well. As my father was he's a Russian, born in Russia, but nevertheless in many ways an Englishman, having been there from the age of 17 or 16 on, with an interruption here and there. And then came here. We came when I was a small boy at the beginning of the war, really, 1940. So we've been surrounded too by people from all parts of the world, and therefore I've had an interest that's fairly broad, and which is what led me to be a graphic designer as opposed to an architect. I rejected myself the idea of doing one thing for a long time, which is what architects have to do. And it so frightened me, the idea of having a concept and working through something in a week, and then 5 years later finding out that the funds were no longer available and the project might not even exist. I do these posters, and the next week they're all around town practically. And it's something that I can stand as a way of doing things. Most of what I do is concerned with running in and out of subjects, mostly overlapping ones, as it happens. There's never just one thing going on.
Well, you do a lot of running in and out of subjects and places and a variety of fields. Perhaps we should talk about some of your current involvements. And since at least two of these are corporate ones behind us, why don't we start with some of your corporate involvements?
Well, it's hard to explain in a way what a designer is, and one way of doing it is to explain the kind of things that I'm involved in. And when we speak of mobile, that isn't simple either. I mean, these posters are all for institutions, really. This one happens to be on network television. The Minstrel Man, which was a single show, but mostly they're on public broadcasting, as you know, and a lot of the posters have to do with our cultural institutions that Mobile supports, and then Mobile supports me at the same time by asking me to help. But that corporate involvement is not just following through on something like this. See, every poster has 50 things that go along with it. There are press kits and letterheads and caption sheets and ads in newspapers and 60 newspapers and so on and so forth. And it becomes a very big operation, which means, in my case, that I may be involved in the basic design, the basic concept, but in order to accomplish this volume of work, I have to have a support system. So I have as does my partner Tom Geismar, and between us in this area we have 30 people that are work away getting things done. But what I wanted to say was that it's not just this kind of work that comes out from mobile. There's also, I'm responsible for their art that they have in their offices, and they have a lot of offices around the world.
You mean their own corporate collection?
Yeah.
In what way are you responsible?
Well, I'm the chairman of the committee that goes and buys them, and as the rest of the committee is a couple of people from the company who are interested in art, namely the chairman of the company and the head of the public relations department, who are very busy. My committee really is me, so I just go and involve myself around the world in getting things that I think are interesting. And it takes a lot of time, and it's very enjoyable.
And your taste, like your work, is eclectic. What helped shape your own vision? With whom and where did you study?
Well, see, all these questions don't have nice, clean answers. I went to 24 schools, at least a dozen of which I have no memory of whatsoever, and the remaining dozen, I'd say 10 of them had no effect on me whatsoever in any positive or negative way. And I ended up really at the Institute of Design after Harvard, and then went on to Yale finally. Those three had some bearing on it. But as a designer, it took me at least 7 years to recover from the design education that I had, it being a negative force.
What do you mean?
If I had it all over again, I would have either been a biology major or a chemistry major, I think. In any case, one of the sciences...
You can't pass that by so quickly. What do you mean?
Well, I think they're more useful for a designer than design education. I didn't mean to become a chemist. I'd be a terrible chemist, but I would have learned some disciplines that are always handy, and logical structural system. I mean, design is really common sense in the use of vocabularies that are not quite so familiar. I mean, there is very little visual training in the world, as
don't you think we need more rather than less visual training?
Yes, but not of the kind that you get in design school. It's the kind that you should get in school. Actually, visual education is quite good, I think, in kindergarten, which means you really let little kids do whatever they want to do, and they don't become destroyed until they're almost 7 or 8 years old.
Well, what would this ideal curriculum be for you?
Being a designer or an artist of any kind really requires work. It's mostly hard work, which is a matter of discipline. I don't think it matters how you get it. All the technical sides of what are required can be crammed into a very short period of time once you know what you want to do and once you know how to work.
In your own varied work, is there any central guiding artistic principle or standard?
No, I'm a thief when it comes to those things. I think that's what a designer really is, in a way, which means that that any kind of imagery that communicates is basically valid. Therefore, all kinds of handwritings are valid and all kinds of influences are valid. And one ends up stealing a lot from really other people's minds, as well as one's own prior work. You steal from your own
But that special
past
synthesis,
endlessly.
I assume, makes it an original creation. From what source do you generally get your ideas?
I really don't know. Mostly from asking belligerent questions. I think, you know, somebody presents you with a problem. My first attitude towards it, as the first stages of the design process, is to really find out if indeed the problem you've been asked is the real problem. And surprisingly enough, it usually isn't, or at least not exactly.
Well, perhaps you might tell us from beginning to end how you go about resolving a problem. Why don't you start from start to finish? And I noticed an inky finger. Glad to see you worked so hard today. Perhaps you might tell us about a specific problem and how you go about resolving it from start to finish.
Well, I mean, to take something.
I guess that's your most recent, behind you, the Temple of
Yeah, it's the
Dendur.
most recent, but it's also not very interesting to talk about because I didn't design the Temple of Dendur, unfortunately. I wish I had. That's just, you know, selecting the best of what the Metropolitan Museum made available to make a poster out of, and then to try and do something typographically with it that would integrate
Well, let's
with
do
it
with
in
this
some
one. Here
kind
you
of
have a
way.
piece of information that you, or some original reference that you then translate visually. How did you do that?
Well, what this poster has to offer, if anything, is the observation that about these shelter posters is that they're bigger than people.
Bus shelter.
Bus shelter. This is a small printed version, but they're really, it was designed for a bus shelter, and those hands in the bus shelter are life size. And it was seeing all those shadow forms at the end of the day who silhouette against these things that determined this notion of making the hands, which are the white gloves of the minstrel singers, become the white gloves of all these black silhouetted forms along the bus shelter. So people are standing there with funny hats or not, and there are these two hands that are behind them. And it really started from not really from anything more than observing what one can do in a shelter, for a shelter poster, that becomes a little bit more participatory, a little bit more related to people and distances that our people have viewed, and that's really how it came about, as opposed to, you know, just making a great big hand 8 feet high or whatever would also be possible, or some other image. But it started from that point of view.
You embrace a number of different styles in your work. Do you ever find them to be contradictory?
Well, if they hopefully don't come up at the same time, they're not contradictory. If they come up inappropriately, it's different. I just, as a designer, really have felt very, very strongly about drawing, for instance. I think drawing is the essence of all good work, and if you have good hands that way, then it's extremely helpful form of communication. You don't have to use it as such, but it's a way of translating from mind to hand to paper that it's terribly a valuable thing to understand. Now, I've never been able to draw very well. It took me a long time to get over the fact that I shouldn't worry about it, seeing I've already picked this job and it's too late and I might as well draw. So I do. And I draw with scissors a lot. You know, I cut things out with scissors, and that's one of my particular tricks that I didn't invent, but it comes very handily.
What's the
So it
difference?
makes me a great admirer of people who cut things with scissors, like Matisse. You know, I like the directness of the paper cutouts of his, or the Cubist work of Braque and Picasso very much
Do you
too.
respond to the work
But
of Motherwell in that same sense? Feels that torn
Well,
edge versus that Matisse
yeah.
boxed into a corner cutting edge.
Well, I consider Motherwell to be just another extension of Braque and Picasso in this particular regard, in his collages.
Because I noticed both a torn and a cut edge in that particular.
You know, that the torn edge to prove that you meant the cut edge, and vice versa.
What's the difference between design and art, Ivan?
Either a lot or none, depending. See, design is not intended to be art. Somebody else decides that, as it so happens, it's art. Then it's one and the same. But the purpose is not quite the same. I mean, design is solving other people's problems. Art is solving one's own problems, or should be, in visual terms. Otherwise, you're in the art business. And art business is even a lower category than design, which is just a trade, like plumbing, really, a surgery sometimes. But it's a questionable activity. So I don't know, Barbara, really what design really can mean in those terms, and what that difference is, except for this relationship to other people and putting their problems first, which you have to redefine, you have to argue, it has to come out freshly as possible, but it may not be art. And I think artists who make art actually also make rather bad art. If you think about art too much, it's counterproductive to production of the same.
You said before that the cutting edge is one of your tricks. There are certain, obviously in anyone's work and in yours as well, certain recurring themes, certain pictorial devices. Can you describe some of them to us and what their evolution or purpose is?
I can, and I'm not sure that it'd be very profitable for our audience, because it's rather esoteric in a way. It's hard to explain. I happen to feel very strongly towards sort of Michean type of philosophy, which says that less is more. Which means that I like to make things that are very simple and straightforward, and to remove from them any extraneous matter to the extent that one's capabilities allow one. I mean, I always try to end up with one image and one thought, and then let the typography or the messages that have to be there relate back to the format. See, all of, well, not the Temple of Dengdar exactly, that's integrated into it. But more often than not, this lettering that you see here in these posters is related to the rectangle, not to the hands. It's only the strength of the type or the choice of the type may be somewhat related by way of going with it or going against it in contrasting terms. But it's related to the format and not tucked into the image. I told you, I warned you.
Does type interest you especially? Typeface?
Oh yes, sure. I mean, I Well, it's like asking a doctor if he's interested in the human body. Yes, it's the life's blood, really, of what we have. And there are thousands of choices. And when I was at Yale, where I met my partner Tom Geismar at Columbia, as it happens, we were at Yale, but there's no library of type at Yale, and there is a great one at Columbia. And we spent weeks and weeks in this dusty place pulling out books that had never been pulled out before to design 2 typefaces, one each for our theses. And yeah, it's a fascinating world because, like any subject, it may look small at first glance, and then it becomes enormous. It encompasses the whole history of man, really. And it's all in there, from primitive scratching on stones to highly sophisticated people like Mr. Garamond.
What's ahead for typography in the printed word?
Pardon?
What's ahead? What's it all going to look like?
Well, I don't know. I think it may not look so different because we're so used to seeing things in a certain kind of way. How it gets there is changing rather than how it looks.
In what way?
No, computer typesetting and faster, much more efficient ways of getting the language onto paper or onto video screens or onto whatever may be required. It has its own technical changes and influences. But I think that's really what it's all about, and which is of no interest to me whatsoever, frankly.
Well, doesn't it change the nature of your work, at least in terms of
yes,
the time allotted to certain tasks?
Well, not really, because personally I'm just not involved with that side of it. I'm much more involved with the humanistic end of what it's all about, and which is what I care about, is the side of it that is rather old-fashioned, perhaps, in that sense. But the wonders of the New World do not attract me. Although I get, the farther back I look, not into my own time, but it seems to go farther back yet.
And what century are you now?
I read about animals and archaeology, not design. When I'm waking up in the middle of the night, I read things like Peter Matheson's books, not anything anybody has to say about design, which is a terrible bore as a subject to read about. Even in a way to contemplate it all. Doing it's quite fun, however.
In a shop as large as yours, you mentioned there were more than 30 people that work for Chermayeff and Geismar. How do you manage to get design or quality control?
It's difficult. One does it by trying to have around one the very good people who one respects and who have really creative talents of their own to bring to the activities of the office, and that's the best insurance. And the other insurance is staying up late and being involved with everything all the time, which can drive other creative people crazy. But it does, I think, help the quality of work to stay close to it. Otherwise, one could be very much larger and do things that involve projects of another kind. That it would be very easy to have an office of hundreds of people in design, because design is a needed function in our society, I believe. But a good part of it is not.
How does American
not fun.
design rank with design in the rest of the world? In the 60s, it seems to me that Milan was the forerunner. Where do we rank these days?
Oh, I think right at the top, really. although it's not really a question anymore of nationalities, all the designers in the world sort of know each other, or at least they know that each other's
All
work.
22 of them.
And so I feel I have a good knowledge of 6 or 8 people in Japan whose work I know, 2 or 3 of whom I've met, and the same would be certainly in Switzerland or England or Germany. People who
Is there
are
a
of
certain
great talent
homogeneous quality
behind
to
me.
your work?
Pardon?
Is there a certain homogenized quality to your work?
No, not necessarily. There's a similarity of problems that make similarities of solution to an extent. And we are very much like at least one firm in Stuttgart that's like us, and one firm in London that's very much like us, called Pentagram. And we started we're all about the same age. We all started 20 years ago. And that we're more similar to those 2 firms than we are to a lot of our colleagues here in New York who may have come through the world of advertising or some other, or industrial design and product design, and have somewhat different background and interest.
Excepting your own work, who are the best designers at work today?
I think they're people like Pentagram, and there are a lot of individual designers who are really awfully good, like people in New York like Massimo Vignelli and Arnold Sachs and George Cherney. Milton Glaser is an illustrator, and who I understand is spoken here. Is also a terrific designer, beyond being just an artist in his own right. He's one of the best designers. A very broad and flexible person, which is what design requires. And there's, I think we all know them, Saul Bass in the West, and many others there. All the partners of Pentagram are good designers, and Total Design in Copenhagen, or rather Amsterdam. And Iko Tanaka, you never heard of Iko Tanaka, but he's a
Household word?
he is a household word in Japan. And he does all the oil companies over there.
You made reference to some graphics designers in this country coming out of advertising agencies in what I took to mean a less than enthusiastic kind of training. It seems to me that with your very philosophical, contemplative, humanistic approach, that I wonder if you can tell us, what does it require for you to satisfy, on the one hand, a creative urge, your standards of excellence, and still meet the demands of a client or an advertising agency or a government agency? Are those two is the aspiration and the client compatible? Is it possible to do something that is commercially viable and aesthetically outstanding is really, I guess, the heart of the question.
Sure, but, well, if you take a real advertising pro like George Lois, who has a very vernacular way of thinking and producing messages and ideas. He's a superb designer, a very sophisticated guy, really. Sometimes it may not appear that way, but he is. He knows what he's doing. He once said, I remember years ago, because we were also about the same age, and we've known each other since we started out, more or less. He said, you know, when you do a good job and it's rejected, you just do another good job, and then you do another good job until the deadline arrives, and this good job gets done, as opposed to doing something that you don't think is right, and no matter who's leaning on you. I mean, clients have to be beaten regularly with clubs, and if they don't like being beaten by clubs, then they will find designers that will allow it to work the other way.
In working for some of your clients, particularly some of the major ones, how much do they dictate the content of the material? And I'm not only talking about posters, but your work includes museum exhibitions, product identification, all sorts, a very wide range of graphic material. How heavily are they involved in the conceptualizing and the content of your work?
Not terribly much. They're good clients. The best kind of client is a client that could do the job himself if he had the time. In other words, has a real understanding of why he's asked you to do it and what his problem is, and can state the thing very clearly, and it practically could all come on double-spaced on a postcard and be a very efficient kind of brief. There are other kinds of problems that really the client is not really a client as much as a partner, because he just knows a lot. I mean, if you're doing an exhibit, and you mentioned exhibits, which I've been involved with many. Well, for instance, 2 years ago, we designed an exhibit on chemistry for the Chemical Society, the American Chemical Society, to travel around the country to science museums to essentially explain that chemistry is not a totally impenetrable subject. That was the purpose of this. And so what I had was 100 chemists for partners, really, which made a hell of a hard job, but I got that college education that I missed in that subject.
That's why I wanted to be a chemistry major.
And instead of paying tuition, I was paid for my time instead, and had really on call some of the great minds in this area from industry and from universities and from
Let's take an exhibition where the expertise is not quite so specialized. I'm thinking of one that you are currently completed, where I assume many people involved with the project, let alone those from without, have a very decided point of view about its content, its approach, its focus, its direction. I'm talking about that famous long-term Massachusetts project. Can you tell us something about that?
Well, you're referring to the Kennedy Library, which has been a long time brewing. I.M. Pei is the architect of the project, which is going to be a year and a half away in South Boston and Dorchester, near the airport there, and it's from our point of view, following his 8 years of struggling with a building and varying sites and troubles with communities and so on. For us, it's been 2.5 years of trying to sift through an incredible volume of material, which is housed by a very powerful and very articulate family who are all involved and all interested and big, and there are a lot of people involved. As you know, Senator Robert Kennedy has 11 children, and even the smallest of them, who's only about 7, I think, he's not out of touch with it entirely either. So that becomes a different kind of
How do you deal
thing.
with that?
As best you can.
If you were to redesign New York, what would you do?
I don't know. I don't think it's really possible. That's too big a question.
Well, let me make it simpler for you. What are the most striking contemporary design failures in New York?
I think it's not. it's not that really so much as the negative forces at work in the city have been allowed to come too close to the surface, to the point that they erupt around us all the time, and that doesn't seem quite necessary to have it. I mean, it's a matter of backtracking as much as it is going forward. We don't need new, exciting architecture. We need to save a lot. We don't need, to ship everybody home to wherever they came from, as much as to have a relationship to in social terms. Those are the problems of which all you're doing is making clear what I was hinting at earlier, is that design is so small a priority in the world, especially our world of New York, that it's hardly worth talking about. It's not as though it was on the bottom of a list of 100. It's just sort of off the charts, as they say, only the other way. It doesn't.
Do you think that's still the case, that we're quite so squandering
I think
our patrimony in this city?
I think it's a combination of that all thoughtful New Yorkers have, and by New Yorkers I mean people who are not passing through town, that it's a love-hate relationship here. You hate it, but where else are you going to go? When you go out of town, which I do almost every week, it doesn't take you long, mostly half a day at the outside, to thank your lucky stars that you're here in this rotting madhouse. But how to make it better is sort of nibbling away and trying to do it. And I think there are just thousands of people of very good will here, which is one of the most hopeful signs. A lot of people do care, although some others would immediately say, well, prove it to me. But it's not by design. At least my kind of design that will save it. I mean, better signs
can enhance it.
Better subway maps don't make the city better. They just make a few little minor events.
We're about to have a new subway map, as you know, a color-coded subway and a color-coded map that matches the subway rather than a numerical subway system. What do you think in the most recent period are some of the visual enhancements of the city, other than your big red juicy 9 on West 57th Street?
Well, I'm very taken with the city walls projects and this idea of sort of doing something with some of our empty walls. I think that's visually noticeable and not too heavy on the city's budget. And in fact, it isn't on the city's budget at all.
It's all done by the private sector. But how do you reply to that criticism that very often that kind of decoration, that kind of surface decoration, is often a mask for failed social systems rather than an enhancement of the environment?
I don't argue with that. It's true. It's absolutely true as far as I can see in most conditions.
What do you consider your most significant contribution to design in general, and perhaps specifically this city, to be?
I don't know that I've specifically made any contributions. I think all designers who produce quite a volume of work are attempting to make some kind of worthy activity more visible, and therefore we're making some contribution. But it's not very convincing. I mean, I wouldn't think it'd be worth even putting on the tombstone with a magic marker, let alone chiseling in.
You've worked with the government, you've worked with corporate clients, you've worked with the private sector, with not-for-profit organization. What makes for an ideal client? With whom would you prefer to work and why?
As I said earlier, I really like clients who know what it is they're doing, because then it's a dialogue and it's not, it's not another kind of relationship.
That's the ideal client.
Doctor-patient relationships between designers and clients are not really as good as partnership relationships, if I can put it that way. And it doesn't matter who and where they are, whether they're... So Mobil is a very big corporation, as we all know. It's incredibly big. It's a 40-some billion dollar corporation, which is, there are over 50,000 gas stations. We have designed packages for them for 14, 15 years now. They have 8,000 products. They come in different sizes, 25,000 packages. It's all out of whack with any kind of scale. But actually, except for the time involvement, our client relationship is excellent. It's not a client anyway. It's many, not many in the terms of hundreds out of their tens of thousands of employees, but it is more than two hands. Public relations, there are 3 or 4 people, one works with them. I work very closely with a man called Herb Schmertz, who's the director of all these public service efforts that Mobil supports, museums or television or exhibits or whatever it may be. We don't have long meetings and long discussions. I pick up the phone and I say, Herb, I don't think we ought to do this, or why don't we do that? And he says, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Why don't you do it? And that's the end of our meeting. It was over the end of the telephone.
Are you saying that you prefer the corporate sector, for example, to government?
Oh my God, yes. The government is a bureaucracy, and a lot of corporations are too. But government is very difficult to work for because it's so difficult to find out who in government is a real person. And it's very difficult. And then if you find one, the next thing you know is that he hasn't been reelected, or who knows what, or has been shifted from one sector to another sector, and the whole thing dribbles away in the night after a year's work. It's it can be very disheartening working with government. I've never found it to be satisfactory.
Well, then tell us about one of your experiences. You were the chairman of the first Federal Design Assembly. What was the result of that enterprise, and is it something that you think it has been repeated? Do you think it's had any effect?
Relatively little. It's perhaps some, but considering the energy expended, I mean, I mentioned it's people.
What was the purpose of that assembly?
To raise the level of consciousness amongst government administrators as to the value of design, architecture, landscaping, and all that. All of these things that they're using good taxpayers' funds for, that it seemed a good idea to have them understand it a little bit better. And Miss Nancy Hanks, our former chairman of the National Endowment of the Arts, was a very powerful, very intelligent, very forceful, effective lady who's done a great deal, in my estimation at least. I'm sure the estimation of most who have watched what that endowment did, which she made, really. She built that endowment into a powerful, funded operation.
From 10 million to 80 million, if we were to translate it in numerical terms.
115, I think.
Now it's 150. But that's since that period.
That takes a lot of doing, because the Congress is not overly jumping up and down to hand over large sums of money like that.
Well, I don't think they're jumping up and down, but they're certainly more more enthusiastic, and it may be in part to Nancy Hanks' effective, persuasive powers, but certainly it is because there is a more visible and vocal constituency for the arts in every part of the country, let alone that $80 million translated into various communities. Are you still involved with the endowments and the federal design program, and would you say their level today is equal to this golden period that you refer to?
No, I think it's in a state of decline myself. The general awareness at a low level is greater and more widespread, but it always comes down to people. It doesn't matter how much money there is. It's a matter of who's dishing it out. And in my own view, the level of intensity and involvement of really first-rate people has diminished somewhat.
And how do you explain that? Is it because you suggesting that it's politicized, or a different?
No, I think it's these things turn over in a different cast of characters, and I don't think they're as vibrant and valid as they were. I'm a trustee of the Museum of Modern Art. It has, I don't know, 500 and some employees. It's a very powerful force in the art world, obviously. It has a tremendous number of visitors, tremendous publishing operation. It reaches out all over the world. And yet, if you ask, is it really, in artistic terms, that much more vital and important than it was when it was a little backroom operation in 1930s on wherever it was, 8th Street. I really don't know, but I'm sure it isn't in direct proportion to the staff of 5 to now 550. I know perfectly well that it isn't 10,000 times better, or whatever the percentages and whatever that math turns out to be.
Are you still as involved with a private sector counterpart in a sense of that Federal Design Assembly? I'm thinking of the Aspen Design Workshops, as you have been in the past, and what is the purpose of that group?
The purpose of all of these things, at least conferences and assemblies and organizations like the American Institute of Graphic Arts, which I was involved in for quite some time as president, is to increase communications, to make other people understand what can be done, and to understand from other people as well. It's really to set up as much dialogue as possible. It's essential, design being a communications business. I really do believe in that communication side of it. And one gets frustrated, and I can sit here and make nasty remarks. But nevertheless, communications are better than ever. There are ways of and means of getting at what the visual world is all about now that are different than they were 10 years ago and 20 years ago, and certainly, it's like the speed of locomotion. It's the same thing. Communications just has increased so vastly and so well. And advertising now is just a lot better. It's the basic content that's worse, and at least on television. But the ads are greater than they were. It's only the shows that stink.
In a recent Saul Steinberg retrospective, the works belonging to one collector were more manifest than any other. And you are obviously that collector. What about the work of Steinberg has reached and absorbed you for so long?
Well, he's a genius, and geniuses are hard to find and hard to come by, especially ones that are close to your own frame of reference. I've always thought he was a genius. So, and it was a time when he was affordable. So we have always been very involved with it. Steinberg is the essence of what a designer would like to be, and he's capable of putting down on a piece of paper anything that he can think. It doesn't have to be a visual thing. He can draw music, he can do anything you want. He's quite remarkable that way. Paul Klee had some of these talents too, and there are a few people that have, but naturally.
Is he a very heavy influence on your work?
Oh, sure. But it's not necessarily visible because he has such a strong handwriting. You can't take it and use it as your own. But
it's an interesting
he
choice.
makes connections that are very revealing and very provocative, which is what one tries to do as a designer, in whatever form and media is possible.
It's an interesting choice of word for you to say, yes, such an unmistakable handwriting. And earlier on, in the early part of our conversation, you made reference to handwriting as well. If there is one of the recurring images in your work, it is a kind of calligraphy too. What is it that you're trying to say or do with that kind of what has been referred to as a stabbing bravura italic hand? That's you.
Well, I just like writing and
list
making marks and scratching, and because it's a very personal type involves other people. You have to call them up and on the phone and ask them to set something and make proofs and go through all this labor. And if you just scratch on this paper or piece of clay or cut things with scissors and just make these little marks, they're your own marks. So I like to do that because they integrate very tightly with whatever imagery you're using it. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but if I use handwriting, I use the word loosely, it's always with the same implement that I did the rest of the thing with. So if I've done a thing with a big brush, then I'll draw it with a big brush. I won't suddenly come in with a new instrument. So it's just an extension of keeping things together and simple. And I like that sense of immediacy that handwriting has.
In your heart of hearts, do you think of yourself as an artist or a designer?
Oh, I think of myself as a designer. Sometimes there's some artistic things that come out of it. You mentioned that 9. Well, the 9 is 6,000 pounds of steel that sits on the sidewalk on 57th Street. It was not thought of as making a piece of sculpture. It was thought of as a design solution to a particular problem. There is a building which is against the street. It's this great curving glass slope, as you know, that comes down, and the place is rather without comedy. There's no lightness about it, and that this red 9 that sits on the sidewalk is really a relationship physically to that building that's lightens the load. I think that was my rationalization for it. That's why it's painted red instead of black and white, and why it's the scale and size that it is, so that you have to confront it as an object. Now, it comes out looking like a minimal sculpture, but that's after the fact. It wasn't to design a piece of minimal sculpture out there. It just happens to have those overtones and references. But I like it better for myself for the reason that it's not that arbitrary. It is the number of the building, and the fact that it doesn't say love appeals to me enormously.
Soon going to see love in other languages on Central Park South and what was
No,
it,
I didn't
Fifth
mean
Avenue
that. I
and
was talking
60th?
about Robert, Indiana.
That's what I meant. There's going to be a Hebrew love on 60th Street and Fifth Avenue in several
I
weeks.
hate it already, sight unseen.
Sounds racist to me.
Sounds, it
Ivan,
sounds commercial.
Handwriting is obviously,
See, that's more
you know,
commercial than what I do.
is really something that absorbs you. You had a problem to solve for the Yonkers Museum, an under-budgeted, understaffed, ambitious new building, and you used another kind of handwriting. Can you tell us about the resolution of that problem and how?
Oh, it's just speed. I mean, it's just the stationery and their forms and announcement. They're having no money. I either wrote everything out or typed it on the typewriter, just to avoid getting anybody in the middle that would send me a bill that I would then have to send on. That's really all. So it came out of saying, well, okay, how simple can we make this, and yet, you know, retain some sense of freshness and some sense of originality about it. I mean, you can, in the end, all of these efforts have to be noticeable and memorable in some degree or another. Not necessarily noisy, mind you, but at least not invisible. Otherwise, you haven't done that side of the job. You haven't made something that's valid and purposeful. You might as well have not been involved. So
How much of
all
your-
these criteria come together, and you then and they have their determinants. Some of them are artistic, some of them are functional, some of them are economic, and they all come together with different priorities at different times, and you sort them out. I think it's what design is all about, sorting things out.
How much of your work is autobiographical?
I don't think any of it's autobiographical. At least, maybe I don't understand what you mean. What do you intend by that?
Just what it said. Just wondered how much of your own experience informed, you know, personal, direct experience.
Oh, only in the sense that I said earlier on of being a thief. I mean, once you have a good idea that has any kind of general statement attached to it, then you go back and use it over and over again. Partly because you've tested the validity, and partly because it saves time and produces some results. So that's why I tear up little bits of paper and have, you know, just stacks of junk lying around me, because I just found that junk is very
Maybe you should
good
tell him about
resource.
the Ivan Chermayeff kitsch collection.
well. That's only by way of saying that I feel that the sources of inspiration for me are from the commonplace side of the world. I get more from a guy who owns a barber shop in Astoria who hasn't got the funds, or his own background doesn't allow him the possibility of going and hiring one of these idiots with plastic letters to ruin his thing, so he does it himself. And maybe he doesn't spell very well, maybe he doesn't have all kinds of sophisticated understandings about letter forms, but he knows what it is that he has to say. And that directness of communication is extremely valuable. And so is kitsch and junk and popular things that you find in airports. I just find very interesting this, you know, if somebody like Andy Warhol does something, I mean, if it receives any notoriety, like hitting the the art pages of Newsweek and Time, it'll be knocked off in Taiwan within the hour. And it's kind of comic to see how many forms of Coca-Cola, in terms of candles and cigarette lighters and radios, all in the shape of Coca-Cola.
So you have the Taiwanese, the
so
Korean,
I have all these,
and
this
every
junk
Hong Kong and every other variation of that same salt and pepper shaker. More Chiquita bananas sitting on your windowsill.
Yes, I like that banana harmonica. That's from Hong Kong, I think. It's 69 cents in O'Hare Airport. Terrific.
Ivan, what would you like to be doing in 10 years from now?
Something else. Whatever it might be.
What did you have in mind?
If I really knew, I'd be starting yesterday.
I thought that's what you were spending all those weekends doing.
Well, I like to do things which come from my own problems. In that sense of being an artist, I like to sometimes write the brief instead of having it handed to me. But I still don't like to think of it as art. I like to paint, but I don't think of myself as a painter. It comes...
You spend a lot of time painting, creating, assembling.
No, but...
How influenced are you by assemblage and film in your own work?
In film? My own work? I don't know. A film is to me is to be a content subject and not a technique subject. I'm influenced by minds at work, like most people, I think. So, Bergman and Fellini and Kurosawa, I like them all for different reasons. That they make films about something, not that look like something. They happen to do that too, because the craft helps the message, but the message is primary, which is what's so terrible about design. The message is usually not very fascinating.
Well, your conversation was, and for giving us the chance to share, listening to a mind and a sensibility at work. Special thanks to you, Ivan Chermayeff. Thank you for being with us. We have several minutes left, and what I'd like to do is to ask the class to share in the conversation. If you have a question, won't you please raise your hand, and if you care to, since this is being taped as well, won't you identify yourself by name? The woman on the aisle.
I'm Golden Society Publication Designers, and I'd like to ask